This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Care Notes, led by Doug Wilbur. And Doug, you have a guest for us today. So I'm going to actually be able to sort of sit back and listen more than talk. I love it.
Well, you can talk as well. So, I do want to introduce, a guest that we've known each other for a number of years. You've worked a little bit more with Lena than with me directly, but you definitely come with a distinguished background, and matter of fact, surprising, I didn't realize you'd been at some of the places that you've been to, and as in the social work and other factors, everything from the Dolan Center in Chardon to law firms to Western Reserve to Alzheimer's Association. Am I right with that? Yeah. So
yeah.
There's a lot of experience that you have. So just if you don't mind, so the audience really understands, tell us a little bit about your background, your education, some of the things that I mentioned, and then where you are currently.
Sure. I started, my sister, I have a younger sister, and she was dealing with a cardiac concern that she had when she was a teenager. And I realized that I wanted to be a social worker because she was a 17-year-old on a floor, a cardiac floor in Pittsburgh with a bunch of older people. And no one knew what to do with this 17-year-old. And so I said, well, who's taking care of you? And she said, well, I have a really nice social worker. And I thought, I can do that. So I thought that I wanted to be a medical social worker. And I came over from Pennsylvania to go to Case. And they were handing out the field placements, and they said, and we know that you want medical, but we have a gerontological spot and they have medical concerns there. So it kind of overlaps. So I was actually introduced to gerontology because of a space issue, but it turned out to be one of the luckiest, quirky things that happened in my life, because I got to go out there and do the field placement and begin working with older individuals, which led me to be introduced to the Dolan Center, which was this extraordinary building while it was up and running in the 80s and 90s, really cutting edge way of caring for people with dementia. And that kind of overlapped with the Alzheimer's Association. And I really realized that this was the population that I really enjoyed. And on again, off again through my career, I've always come back to gerontology. The only thing that's interesting is that people don't seem quite so old anymore. When I started, I was like 22. And now, I'm still helping, a gerontological population, but I'm thinking, hey, these guys aren't that old anymore.
Right, exactly. So they used to seem much older.
Much older.
It's hitting people at young ages, isn't it?
Right. What are all these young people doing in this facility?
Right. So, one of the things, just even talking about the Dolan Center, I don't know if people really know what the Dolan Center was, but it was one of the best that I understand, one of the original centers that really looked at Alzheimer's.
It was an extraordinary place. And again, I feel like I fell backwards into this really amazing opportunity. Heather Hill, which is out in Chardon. And now I think it's an independent community, but the Corinne Dolan Center was a gift from the Dolan family, which in Cleveland we know largely because they also own our baseball team. But Corinne Dolan Center, and there was a combination, and I can't remember exactly how, but the Taliesin Company, which was an architectural firm that was affiliated with Frank Lloyd Wright, was involved in building it. And the reason it was so cool is it was trying to look at life from the perspective of a person with dementia, and how could it be not simplified, but just kind of boiled down to the essence of what's the most important thing, instead of having way too much stimulation and whatnot. So it was not a long hallway, but a round space where if a person was wandering, they would have the freedom to come and go and stop and start as they wanted to. And it had shadow boxes, which are now much more of like kind of a common thing that you would see on a dementia unit, where you could put the individual's own personal belongings in there, maybe photos of what they looked like when they were younger, or knitting that maybe a woman had done. Men would often have military medals and stuff. So not only would that tell the group about who you were, it would remind you that this is my room without you having to ask for it. So you would know that when I get to this spot, this is where I stop. And it was just so clever in so many different ways, to really bring dignity back to a person who's really feeling a lot of that kind of stripped away. So they had lighting on the toilets, and it was just and a curtain instead of a door, so it could be, you know, a visual cue, and it could just help the person, oh, there's that thing I'm looking for, and I don't have to ask anyone and feel like a kid. You know, I can just I'm finding what I need without having to ask for it quite so much. So,
And a lot of those things have since been adopted by
right.
other centers, but you are one of the originators of those things.
It's funny to see stuff everywhere now when and realize I was working at a place where we were the only ones that are doing that, and now it's universal. It's kind of a funny thing to be in Cleveland that way.
Yeah. And it's kind of sad because it's not operating
it is
anymore.
an empty, dusty building. Well, it's just quirky how it happened. You know, I think that there was a consolidation of all the different resources in Cleveland, you know, about 20 years ago, and University Hospitals took over Heather Hill, and there was a thought that the building could be multi-purposed, but it was such a unique building. It really only had one noble purpose, and they put an elevator in and a whole bunch of stuff that, you know, made it more functional in some ways, but kind of took that original vision away. And now it's just sitting empty.
So you went, you know, obviously you were in a very special place very early on in your career,
right?
Which is, you know, when you have that opportunity, it really does change you, because you taste what good looks like, and and you kind of like see care as being innovative, and not just like we're just doing care, you know, kind of a thing.
Right.
So what a great opportunity.
That's so true.
Yeah. So
it is, and it holds that bar up very high. So I think I you kind of verbalized something that I think I must have always held in me, but I've never really thought of it that way. So that's true.
Yeah, when you get kind of spoiled with like what good looks like, or what innovation looks like, and if you have that in your career sometime, or your life in general, it changes you. You know, you really are a different person because of that, and your expectations go way up, which is a good thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were there, and then where'd you move on after that?
Where did I go? I was going to try and do a PhD back down at Case in gerontology, and it didn't come together the way that I wanted, and the world of gerontology moves fast, believe it or not. There's a lot of science in looking at what works and what doesn't, and you have to kind of jump in there. But it didn't really come together, and that's okay. And I was missing the clinical connection that I had. So then I think I went to Hospice of the Western Reserve for a while.
Okay, yeah. And obviously that's, you know, Hospice of the Western Reserve was also one of those innovative places,
Yes.
It was one of the early hospices, as best as I understand, that
Yes.
and they did and still do a lot of things right. So
And I held two roles, the two different roles there that a social worker could have. I was in both of those positions. I started as a bereavement coordinator, and so that's, the individual that kind of greets the family after the loved one has passed, and tries to kind of reconnect that person with life. And sometimes you see their grief can be kind of an obstacle to a normally functioning life, and that can be challenging for people to reconnect with their community and their loved ones and their life. And then the other piece was I was what they called an alt home social worker, which was alt home being the alternative to home. So that was any nursing home, group home, assisted living, anything alternate to home, where a lot of people don't realize you can get hospice services when you're in the nursing home. So that was kind of interesting. A lot of the time you're giving education to the family while they're going through this really, powerful journey with their loved one. And they don't
right.
realize that they can get that help. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah, and so again, great experiences because you saw a real range as far as what you were doing, and then you moved from there to, if you remember, because it's funny when you go backwards.
That's when I moved to chemical dependency for a couple of years, and it was a different opportunity, but I thought that was really interesting. I was a counselor who did an intensive outpatient group in Lakewood, and so that was a different population too. That was my one foray into an under 65 population, and a very different dynamics for sure. but really important. I learned a lot of I had to look at Urban Dictionary like every day because these kids were coming in and it was like they were talking a different language, and I had to say, what does that mean? And there's a lot more resistance to what I'm recommending at that level. So
yeah,
with older people are so grateful so often for any assistance that you want to provide. And I mean, sometimes it's like, well, this wasn't what I was thinking. Wasn't the kind of help. But these are generally folks who really don't want to be there in the first place. They're being court ordered to be there. So that it was good for me. It was I learned a lot about the world, and I learned a lot about like how much resistance I can take. So that was good. And then while I was there was a grant that was available, and the woman who was supposed to go in on this grant was pregnant, and she had to have bed rest. Her doctor indicated that she couldn't do anything for the next several months, that she was planning to do it. So they asked me if I would do it instead. So I actually got to go to the women's prison and provide a treatment group it was a trauma-informed treatment group at Northeast Pre-Release for a year, where I helped women understand how addiction and trauma are linked. And if they were interested in recovery, I could help them with that. And that was amazing.
Yeah. So, but
that was
definitely a different population.
For sure.
A completely different population.
Yes, absolutely. But then the grant was over, and then I kind of was like, let's go back to the fold. And then I went back to nursing homes, and I've kind of been with gerontology ever since then.
Now, I do have a question for you, and that is, I think everything in life is a learning experience, that I'm a real firm believer that if our eyes are open, or if our hearts are open, we can take things from all sorts of different disciplines and apply them and work with them and stuff like that. help us, in another area. So I tend to like just my nature is to kind of learn things from here and say, oh, that might have application here. Did you have any of that from that foray out of gerontology and aging? When you came back in, are there like things that you said, yeah, that this actually applies to this,
Sure.
or I never looked at this way until I went here?
I do think that's a very good point. And I do think that I had a much greater awareness of the impact of mental health through the whole lifespan, and how you may be dealing with anxiety and depression as a younger adult, and how not resolving that has an impact over the lifespan, physically and emotionally. And then if you add concerns of an older person and maybe some cognitive impairment on top of that, that can really, create some interesting dynamics for a person. If they have an underlying diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and then dementia kind of comes in there, you sort of want to be aware of what the parameters of that could be, and how you can't necessarily, because you're in an environment where you might be looking all to dementia, and you're thinking dementia is causing this problem or that problem, and you might want to be aware of the underlying. Maybe this person had institutionalization, maybe they did have some addiction or domestic abuse underlying it, and what that brings to the table once you have cognitive impairment.
Oh yeah.
So, knowing, here's I think the biggest thing I learned from that is that when we're taking care of an elderly person in a communal setting, here's the lifespan, and we know maybe, this much of it. So we don't know everything that came before. You're not responsible for that, but you want to be kind of mindful of that. And I guess the reason I say that is occasionally you'll hear a story of like a caregiver, one of these young, just out of high school, really eager nursing assistants, fresh-faced and everything, and they just really want to make an impact on person, and bless them for that. And they will tell the family, your mom is the sweetest woman. I love to have ice cream with her. We have such a good time. And the last thing that they expect, and what happens sometimes, is they get barked at by a child who didn't have that relationship with their parent. Their mom wasn't that nice to her. She hated ice cream. What the heck are you talking about? You're not talking about someone who sounds like my mom. Sounds like you had a nicer time with her than I did. And I went through all this trouble to get her to this place, and these kids are looking at me like I was just trying to make their day. And of course they were, and they don't realize, boy, did you just step on a nerve that you didn't even know was there.
Right.
And so I just try and help these kids to realize that just because you're telling them that stuff doesn't mean that they're going to receive it, but don't stop doing the things,
Yeah.
Just, being aware that not everybody thought that, Janet was the greatest lady in the world. And that's okay, because maybe she is now.
And one of the other, things, there are times where I've seen it where the caregivers are, have that type of relationship. And as you mentioned, there can be some jealousy or some just, grief, actually, a lot of times, because of things that someone didn't have. And navigating that for both the caregiver and even as a company, can be hard. And I mean, your work as a social worker, one of the things I've also found is that we're seeing, I have over the years seen a number of people, their dementia was caused by a life of abuse. So you have alcohol-induced dementia at times as well, and which carries with it, other issues.
Absolutely.
But the root cause of some people's dementia was their alcoholism, a lifelong, abuse of alcohol. So, And, I have a feeling that we'll probably see that a lot, in the future when it comes to marijuana, because marijuana is as, as much as people feel like it's, there's a push to legalization and acceptance, but there's a lot of psychosis and other things that are directly linked to marijuana. And this isn't a judgment on marijuana per se. It just, I'm telling you, that's the reality of it,
Right.
So, but you've ended up at the Kabb Law Firm, and
Yes.
and so tell me a little bit about what you're doing there.
Well, it really is a great opportunity. I've been friends with Rachel probably 25 years. And so we always we were following a similar career path along the way, and we'd have dinner periodically. And we would, have interest in all of the same issues. And we would say, we really should, collaborate and work together sometime. And so I was working at one of the nursing homes where I worked, and a position became available. And so I jumped at the opportunity. So you're working with a certified elder law attorney, but you're a social worker, and that's a really unique opportunity. We tell people that we try and help them with their legal, financial, and care needs moving forward. Most often, it seems like we get referrals from concerned children who are watching their parents and seeing changes in their cognition, ability to remain independent, quality of life, what they're able to do for themselves. A lot of the time we find this happens, we're coming into our busy season, because you find, kids come home for Thanksgiving, and they're looking at their parents and they're thinking, holy crap, I don't know when the last time was that mom did laundry, or, I'm sorry, I just said that.
Oh, yeah.
But they're realizing it is that dramatic. And so they're saying, or they're just realizing things are slipping, and maybe they're seeing that mom's covering for dad and dad's covering for mom. And, you kind of have to break up the conspiracy a little bit and find out what's really going on. Or one, there's 5 kids, one kid lives in town, and none of the other brothers and sisters can figure out why that one kid is so stressed out, because they're the ones that have been taking mom and dad to all the doctor's appointments, and they're the ones who have been dealing with all the stuff that's going on. So anyway, the families come to us, and a lot of the time stuff has been going on for a long time, and it's some acute event that brings them to us. Oh my gosh, mom broke her hip and she's in the facility, and now they're saying that she can't come back home without some kind of supervision, and we don't know what we're going to do. So they don't know what they're going to do on a couple of different levels. They don't know legally what's the path of command, who's in charge. Mom was the matriarch of this family, but right now she's in a facility and she's getting physical therapy and occupational therapy, and she can't run things anymore. So who's that going to fall to? Maybe you've had that conversation before. Hopefully you've had that conversation before. If you haven't, it's kind of chaos, and everyone's trying to figure out who's in charge.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear Rachel's dog is here. So Rachel brings her dog to work.
So I know.
And then go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so with a law firm, and Rachel does great work and has a phenomenal reputation in the Cleveland area because of the work that she does, and so the law part makes a lot of sense, because that's the piece that where you're trying to get things in order and trying to legally get things straightened out, and sometimes there's complications because they have dementia, and now they never got their affairs in order, and so you have to kind of march through that that quandary that so often happens. So where though is I think most people understand that, but what they may have trouble understanding is what it is that a social worker would do within that that framework. So like what would a day in your life look like? And I know this looks like a lot of things, but but kind of what does that look like?
Sure. Most days I would come here to the office first and meet with the team, because it is kind of a multidisciplinary approach, checking in with Rachel. We have a paralegal who's here, who's kind of in charge of the benefits for a person. She'll do a lot of the Medicaid planning. So she's usually on the phone with Jobs and Family Services and that sort of thing. Maybe we'll have an initial meeting here in the office where we talk to the family and we explain, they're in that crisis that I kind of told you about, and we'll explain how if you work with us and you let us assist you, we'll get things in order legally, financially, and care-wise, so that we'll have a designated person in the family who everyone should go to, and we'll make sure that that person's in charge. We're dealing with families, and we're really kind of rooting around in some areas that usually remain kind of quiet and private. So sometimes having the social worker just sort of do that in a gentle but sort of calculated way to make sure, are we all on the same page here? And if there's, sometimes we have families who come here because we're all on the same page except for Bobby, and Bobby's been trying to rip off mom and dad for a while. And we need for that to stop. And we don't know how to do it because Bobby's our brother and we love him, but he's got to knock this off. Otherwise, mom and dad aren't going to have any money left. So, and that's very challenging for a family to come forward and say that, because we like to keep that stuff private. And so, having that ability to be a social worker and be like, this is very normal, and not normal, but it's not the worst thing that we've ever heard. And, we can help you with this. We don't expect you to be able to deal with this on your own. Here are some things that we can do about that. And we can kind of be the bad cop, if you will. And we can have Bobby come in and we can say, listen, we know you've been doing this for a while, but it really has to stop, because, and these are the reasons why, and neutralize that to the best of our abilities. And I would say 9 times out of 10, Bobby gets the message. So
as a social worker, you're less threatening than the attorney.
Right. Yes, I hope so. And I would like to be able to joke with them and let Bobby know that maybe you're having issues and you need some resources, and I can help you with that. So instead of going to the bank of mom and dad, we can help you get the resources that you need from the community, from agencies that are actually built to do that. Maybe they just have never known where to go. And I can say, do you know that if you go to this place, they will help you with this? And they might not know that. And we can kind of point them in that direction. So that's what we kind of do when we're here in the office. Once we get connected with a family, I see them for up to a year, and I see them at least quarterly to make sure that whatever location they're in, whatever setting they're in, they're experiencing some safety and a quality of life. That could mean I want to go to the nursing home, the assisted living, the group home where they're at, or even go to their home and make sure that whatever we're setting up is working. We might work with the family and set up a whole big plan where they're going to go to a long-term nursing facility. And we've heard that that's the greatest nursing facility, but a couple of things are falling through the cracks in terms of care. And so maybe I'll go with the family to the care conference that they have, where nursing meets with them and the business office meets with them and the physical therapist meets with them and the dietitian meets with them. And we're all getting there on the same page. And then I come in and I just say, well, these are the concerns that the family has. She's supposed to get a shower on Tuesdays and Fridays. And she's telling me that she hasn't had a shower in 2 weeks. And it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. And so we all work together, and nursing says, well, her showers are supposed to take place on Tuesdays and Fridays. And when we went to her on Tuesday, she refused. And so we went back to her we were supposed to go back to her on Wednesday, and we forgot. So then we just figure out where the breakdown is. And it doesn't have to be punitive. It's just, this is where the breakdown happened. And we give them an opportunity to fix it. And then if that doesn't happen, then in another couple of weeks, then I come back and it's like, okay, look, this is what we've done so far. This is where the breakdown happened this time. What can we do? And I just keep going back. And sometimes the individual doesn't remember that they had a shower, and they pull out, their documentation, and it's like chapter and verse, and it's all right there. That's fine too. And then I can go back to the family and say, I know that you're not feeling this, but your mom may be a little bit forgetful, and she's telling you that she's not getting a shower, but we have evidence that it's happening, and we can kind of break it down that way. So that's something that I can do. Occasionally we have to get into guardianship. We had been doing that a lot more before COVID, but it's a very complex process. And so we may be involved in guardianship at this point, but most often what we're doing is helping the family member to attain guardianship through the appropriate channels, rather than Rachel sort of spearheading that and being the guardian for all these different people.
Mm-hmm. So what you're actually doing with is more in that whole care management type of category, correct?
Right.
That's a lot of
yes.
Which the idea around care management is that maybe I'll go backwards a little bit. So often I come into a situation and people are very confused. They've never really done this before. No other family members have gone through it.
Right.
So they are not experts. And so now they have to learn, about dementia. They have to learn about, whatever chronic condition a person might have, what Medicare is and what Medicare pays for, it doesn't pay for, hospice, all sorts of things that has barely been in their lexicon, and definitely not something that they consistently do. So they're looking and saying, please, can you help us?
Right.
So much of what I do when I go in is try to act as a resource. I'm not trying to convince them to use what we do, or if it makes sense, then that's perfectly fine. But so much of it is just helping them to understand what's available, how things work, how this system, which is, very convoluted, happens. And there is no guidebook. There's nothing that says, this is what's done or not done. You have to learn by learning the various factors. Well, if you have someone that has, let's say it's a child that's doing it, they have a busy life. They're trying to figure this out. They're trying to balance out, many, many things. And it's not easy. And then you have the other side, which is, you have maybe a 90-year-old wife trying to take care of her husband, and she really is overwhelmed in those cases. So the care management idea is more that you're coming in and you're saying, let me help you understand this. Is that an accurate way of doing
it? Is.
So tell me like some of the things that, and I apologize because of the delay, but tell me some of those things that you actually are involved in doing. I know you mentioned a handful, but like when you go in, how do you analyze? How do you kind of figure out where someone's at?
Well, I think so. After we have our initial meeting, I go out and I do an assessment of the individual. And people, I think that that's going to be this very complicated clinical tool, but really it's just a visit. I went out, I did 3 different ones yesterday, and all 3 of the cases were all very unique and different. One of them was in a couple's house. They're both about 70. The gentleman has had a stroke, and he's still at home, but he had been in the hospital for a long time. So I'm kind of looking at the situation. I'm looking at what does the house look like from a practical perspective. Is it easy to get into the house and out of the house? Are there a lot of steps? So, I'm kind of taking that piece of it. They have set up a first floor room for this gentleman. So it's like his TV room, but it also has a hospital bed in it. And so he can stay there overnight if he wants to, if he doesn't feel like dealing with the steps. He's getting stronger. But I like the way this family is kind of thinking ahead. And so, I get kind of a sense of like, how prepared is this family to deal with this situation? It feels like they've made adjustments on their own. They've taken a kind of a critical eye to their house, and they figured out this is what's going to work for this guy, and we're going to kind of get the clutter out of the way. So that's a situation where I feel like I can go back to Rachel and I can be like, this is a family who's taken what we're giving and they're listening to what we're suggesting. And when we give them feedback and information, they're receptive to it and they're interested in it, and they're going to take our suggestions and move forward. So we kind of put them on our chart, and we know they're going to receive our stuff, and we're going to, we can talk to them one way. Then there's other, houses that I go to, and you're dealing with a lot of underlying critical problems. Like you're dealing with hoarding is a big problem that we see, and it can lend to some of the challenges that we're dealing with. It got away from me 20 years ago, and I like to have my stuff around me, and my kids don't like to come visit me anymore because there's literally nowhere for them to sit. And I have arthritis in my knees, so my sweet, adorable little dog just goes wherever in the house, and it just builds and builds. And I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm not quite as surprised when they're telling me this list of challenges, because it all is interwoven.
Yeah.
And has to do with this person has had a problem for a long time, and it's finally affected their physical health to a point where this isn't working anymore. So then we have to have a conversation with the family of, are you aware that this isn't working? And sometimes they're aware, and again, they need as the external voice of bad news, they need for us to be the ones who kind of lay the hammer down sometimes, because they can't do it. They love their mom, and either they don't want to be mean to their mom, or they don't have the ability, because their dynamic is just not that way, where I've never talked to my mom that way. I've never told my mom this is how it has to be. So some people will hire an external person to be firm but kind and say, it's time we got to consider going to a facility. And I can't tell your listeners how much I recommend. People say, well, I always told my mom I would never have her go to a home. And my thing that I would say is, don't say that. Of course, none of us want to have our loved ones go to a facility if we can keep them at home. That's an understood thing. But if you make that promise, it becomes much harder when you just don't have the resources and you want your loved one to be safe. And we need to kind of change the thinking that that's the worst possible outcome.
Yeah, I think that that when people, one of the things I've noticed is how much how many issues sometimes are in, and variability there are in families. And there's lots of history and a lot of things that people bring in. And as you kind of work through things, you're working through a lot of different things, promises, right, and other things, relationships that have either been great or have been bad, or great for some and bad for others. And so that's a big challenge in someone doing what you do. It's a challenge in what we do. And right, how do you kind of manage that? What I mean, I know that you've had a lot of training for social work and trying to do that, but how do you handle those differences?
The differences between, I'm sorry, I missed the question, the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. Maybe I'll take complete responsibility for it. What I mean is, because of the different dynamics, you can't treat each family the same. And
No,
so
not at
how do
all.
you go in and deal with some of these dynamic situations that are not
Right,
always like great? It's not, all lollipops and rainbows. So
right. Um, in that particular situation, I'm grateful that we have a team approach so that we have that initial meeting, and then we meet weekly to kind of talk about the progress that we're making. And we usually, after that first meeting, kind of just take the vibe of how does everyone feel about how that went. And um, my feeling is most of the time, if you're to the point where you're willing to bring your personal situation in your family and this dilemma that you have, which again is that kind of private sort of situation, if you're willing to bring it to a professional and put it out there, you've already reached a point where you have an openness and a willingness to work. The people who come to Rachel for assistance are not the people who are going to try and bilk their parents out of their money and get a big inheritance. That's not what the people who want a big inheritance from their parents, no matter what, are not the people who are going to come to Rachel. The people who want to make sure that their parents are cared for and who have an understanding that they will be taken care of no matter what are the people who come to Rachel. So, you're already beginning with a very large majority of the people, and that there's a benevolent element there.
hmm,
Every
yeah,
once in a while, one slides through, and you can kind of see them, and it's like, I think that maybe these folks are trying to work a hustle. And we just kind of let them know that either through the law or life, maybe that's not going to work. And this is what we can do for you. And people kind of weed themselves out. Um, a lot of folks don't know how attorneys work. And the way that Rachel works is you come in for an hour and she has like a consultation kind of a situation that does have a cost. And some folks aren't familiar with attorneys and they think that that's ridiculous, that they should have to come in for an hour and pay for it. And it's like, well, you go to a doctor and pay for it, or you go to,
right.
so folks that have a hard time with that, they're kind of letting us know that maybe they're not the best fit for us, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be great pro bono work out there, but we're trying to work with a living life and a structure and everything, and there's a lot of moving parts. So we're trying to work that out. And then so we stay on top of these cases, and what often happens is everything's going fine until it doesn't, and then everything changes. And I think that's another reason why it's good to have me, is that because you're dealing with elderly people, health is a very dynamic, fluid thing, and you'll see someone come in and they will be the model of successful aging. And when I was down at Case and I was doing my gerontology studies, you would talk about what does it take for successful aging, for a successful elderly life, and it would be exercise and eating right and all this stuff, and these people are doing that, and then something happens and something changes and everything kind of goes sideways a little bit. Well, that's why we're glad that they're already with us, because we have that chain of command of the legal documents in place. And maybe we have some financial planning where now that they're going to go to the hospital and they might not be coming back, what are we going to do with that house? And we have this relationship established with the family where they have a trust built, and they know that they have backup. And we love to be that for our families. So it's a very fluid process. And so I think that when we're dealing with all those different families, it's never, we have stories. We have lots of stories, of we thought it was this, and then it turned out to be this. Life is funny. And so you just, you get this little glimpse into a life, and you see how people make decisions, and it's like, well, that's interesting.
Carolyn, how's
But
it?
you also,
Yeah. How's it for you at the
yes,
end of the day? Okay. When you were younger and you were working with
yes,
the older population, you probably saw that, this is a long time before that's me. But as you get older
yes,
and you're working with
yes.
individuals and some who might even be close to your age, how do you feel when you get home at the end
Yeah,
of the day? How do you separate yourself?
that's a great question. You kind of have to, there's always going to be, however long you want to work in your day, there will be work to fill that space. So you have to give yourself permission at the end of the day to put everything down. It will be there in the morning. And recognizing that there's a lot of really great people who are out there working in all of these different facilities that you're connected with. I'm always amazed when I go through, especially in Cleveland, when I go through one of our acute care hospitals. If I have to go down and see someone down at Lerner Tower or down at the main campus of Cleveland Clinic, which is like a planet, and all these people who work there on a regular basis. And I think, the people in Cleveland are really lucky to have these resources. And Doug and I are in all these different networking groups where we know all these different aging professionals in the Cleveland area, and there's some extraordinary people out there. So I get a little bit overwhelmed, you're right. And I think that, my mom passed away when she was 70. And what I really am experiencing right now is, yes, there are some people who are closer in age to me, but so many people who are older than my folks were. And just trying to imagine what it would be like for them. So, I mean, that's really connecting. I think that when I go home at night now, what I feel is, yes, a little bit closer to those experiences, but I also feel like the network that I have to link people to is so much bigger, and I know it so much better. I feel like my resources are there for them. So when I was a young person, I thought, oh my God, these people, they need so much stuff and I don't know where to send them. But you do this long enough in Cleveland, and Doug, you can attest to this, you see the same people over and over, and they might go different places, they might pop up in different places, but they're the people who really get this business and want to be there as much as I do. So I love when I can, and Doug and Lena are helping us with a case right now. And it's just, sometimes 2 + 2 = 4, but sometimes you got to kind of piece your pieces together. And so we have a woman who's in a facility, and she should be getting 100% care. And for the most part, it's going well, but the family is just really nervous. She's a bit in transition, and they thought, I'd like to feel like she was getting even a little bit more support. And I would like to know that if she needed something, someone's going to be there. So we got, Doug's company together, and it's just adding that little bit, and it's making all the difference for this family. We're meeting with them tomorrow, and I love knowing that I can count on them. And it's just pulling all the blocks together to make something that, is safe and going to make the person happy.
And I would venture to guess, and you can confirm this or not, but I know when I go out and I am meeting with families, and I really try to do that with like all the families, which is not a small task, because I'm
Right.
running a large company, but I feel like it's one of those things that can make a difference in folks' life. But I find it energizing for 2 reasons. One, it keeps me grounded on what our mission is, to be able to do it. But I love the dynamic of knowing a family. So I get energized. I'm tired because you have to really give of your heart. But with every situation, you have to be there and you have to be 100% engaged. But there is an energy that you get by doing that. Or I think for a lot of people that do this, I assume that's the case with you.
Absolutely. And I like to try and make things right, but I like it when I'm met with that same passion and intensity about what we're trying to do. We had a lady at a facility, and she wasn't getting the care that she needed. She was kind of down and around the corner. And like if you were going down the hall and doing care, sometimes she would get forgotten. And I got on my high horse, and I went out to that facility, and I went and saw her, and it was true. She was just getting passed by, and it turns out that she was a lot sicker, I think, than they realized. And I pointed it out to the nurse, and it was a Friday afternoon at about 5 o'clock, and I was really impressed because the administrator was still there. And I stopped and I saw him, and I said, more or less, I basically was saying, I want you to do better. And he really received that so well. And he appreciated my pointing it out. And I thought, is this guy giving me lip service? I don't know. But he did something as soon as I left. They moved the woman. She was moved to another location that was much more visible, and just everything just improved from that point on. The family noticed it. She didn't have much longer. She was only going to be around for like another 3 weeks past that, but all the more reason why that was really, really important. But they were so responsive on a Friday afternoon, and the family looked to us as though we were these heroes or whatever. But I said, well, they're the heroes too, because they took that advice and they were just real responsive. And in this post-COVID era, to have that happen, I just wanted to stress to her, this is a system, and you let us know and we let them know, and they did it, and they told us and they told you, and your mom's better. And that's the best we can ask for a lot of the time. And I was, that whole weekend I was flying high, not because I'm so great, but because the system worked.
Right.
And I was met with gravity that, yes, thank you for letting us know this. You know, we need to do better. And I don't know, it's really, that was really a good one.
Well, I think, just knowing you kind of bring a thing where you will advocate for someone, but you're not assuming the worst of another person, and that's within the system. You understand some of the dynamics. So you have, I think, a really nice combination of like,
I think that's an area where the social work really makes a difference for me, because I've been on both sides.
Yeah.
I know what's realistic to ask for. And so when something is realistic to ask for, I'm going to ask for it.
Yeah, that's good. And I think,
and when it's not realistic, when it's not realistic, I can tell the family, listen, you're asking for something, and nobody in any facility can get that level of whatever, but we can give you this.
So
because they think that everybody's getting something.
If I were to ask you at this point in time, and we're going to wrap things up in a couple minutes, but if I were to ask you what some of the challenges are right now for you, and when I say you, I'm really meaning probably care management in general. What is that right now in a post-COVID world?
I think it is, and it's not, I don't know that I can point any fingers of whose fault it is. It's something that we're all dealing with, is consistency. The world is very dynamic and fluid right now, so it's very difficult. Are we going to mask or not? Are we going to, offer vaccines or not? Are we going to, heaven forbid, close back down or not? Because and some places are going to do it and some places aren't. And so it's difficult to keep everyone informed what's expected. I would rather have, kind of a stop at the door. These are all of our expectations. This is what we need from you. Some facilities have really figured out how to streamline the process, and other ones not so much. And just, recognizing that it is going to be like kind of a need to know sort of a thing, but trying to keep people informed as much as possible. And then, the challenge is, I think, a big challenge that we deal with also is risk versus reward. And by that, I mean, having said, I would prefer that people don't promise that they're not going to put their loved one in a home. There are going to, people are most often always going to want to be at home. When they come into us, they're hoping that what we can do for them is make life possible with the income and assets that they do have, that we're going to make staying home as much, a possibility for them as possible. And sometimes it would really be best if they didn't, because they're not steady on their feet, they're fall risk, that sort of thing. So, you want to give folks as much autonomy as you can, but if they have cognitive impairment, or they're unsteady on their feet, or, various different health concerns. So it's really not hiding those difficult conversations under the rug. and helping families to have those. Again, maybe these conversations wouldn't happen otherwise, but if you bring that impartial third party out there, we can kind of foster the conversation.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I really appreciate the time that you had today to give to us and to give to the audience. You're a gem, the Kabb Law Firm is a real gift to the Cleveland area as well. And so just want to thank you for what you do, and also the wealth of experience that you bring to the table and have, in helping so many different families over the years. So and I think oftentimes people don't get enough thank yous, especially in this area, to, say that, what a difference you make every day in people's lives. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. It's always nice to see you. And thank you as well.
Thank
All right.
you.
Take care.
We'll talk to you all soon.
Have a good night.
Bye now.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.